This video is sponsored by Cooks and DJ the Lazy Gamer, and I'm the great Toad Sage of Mount Miyoboku. Hey, what's up, Closer to Fam? Long time no see. Enjoy an extra long part in exchange for the wait. And as always, please watch until the end. Now to the recap. After their run-in with the Akatsuki and Orochimaru in his new body, Jiraiya and Naruto decided to get back on the road to improve and throw off any potential pursuers. Now both bearing much more weight on their shoulders, Jiraiya accepts his promotion to the position of Hokage now. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Jiraiya and Naruto return. As Naruto, Jiraiya, and Fu are pushed by Tsunade, quite easily in fact, towards Hokage Tower, the younger two of the group fall into a light-hearted conversation as they had become accustomed to.
So Naruto, today's your dad's big day. Must feel weird having to refer to him as Lord Fifth, you know, as a sign of respect.
Ha! I'll never respect a man who deems Grandma Shima's cooking good. Hey, watch it, Naruto. Didn't I just get done kicking your ass? Nope. We decided to end early, remember? That's just called an inconclusive contest, Pops.
No, I think I remember him kicking you in the butt once or twice. He also put you through those trees, remember? Oh, and when he popped you in the nose at the start. It was such good form. As the play-by-play is recited, Naruto's head hangs lower and lower as he walks. Half the embarrassment and half the phantom sting of each blow. And Jiraiya begins to goof out with laughter. Snorting angrily, Tsunade interrupts them. I wasn't planning on pushing you people the whole way. Pick up the pace or I'll throw you.
Everyone walked much faster. Upon reaching the tower, they travel up to meet the third Hokage, who by this point was really ready to retire. No longer wearing his traditional Hokage robe, but instead something more akin to what we see him wearing in filler scenes. As they enter, he looks up from a large stack of papers and smiles as if still a young man. He would greet Jiraiya and Naruto and ask them if they were studious and successful in their pursuit for improvement. Jiraiya grins from both excitement and knowing the importance of this position, and Naruto gives his trademark smile, unable to hide his pride. Hiruzen nods and smiles as well, showing his gladness, and looks to Jiraiya, who realized what he expected. He forms a ram seal and touches his stomach. With a puff, the scroll of seals appeared, and Jiraiya gently set the giant's home on top of the desk. Hiruzen uttered an oath of recognition and gestured towards the two's ragged appearance. When Jiraiya raised an eyebrow in confusion, Hiruzen grunted that Jiraiya had to show himself in front of the entire village in less than an hour or so. Today had already been set to be the big event for a while now. Jiraiya nods in agreement and acknowledgement and declares that he and Naruto will get cleaned up as soon as possible and changed. Naruto then realizes and mentions that he doesn't have a change of clothes on him right now. Unlike you, my boy, I came prepared. He and Naruto retreat off to a nearby mission prep room in the tower. Naruto would quickly begin grumbling when it became clear the only thing available for him to wear at the moment were his tuning vest and an older style of standard fatigues that used to belong to Jiraiya and was about his size. It sported a damaged sleeve that he decided to slice clean to make it more presentable. He ended up liking the lopsided look at the very least. On the other hand, Jiraiya's preparedness was in the form of a Haori jacket and robes made specially for him by Lady Shima, as she did for Minato before him. Remember, kiddo, the man makes the clothes. But take this as a lesson in preparation. As he fumed at his father, Naruto grumbled to himself. Now changed and cleaned up, Jiraiya joins back with Tsunade and Hiruzen, preening and showing off his new attire in front of them. Tsunade didn't seem amused by it, and by flicking his now unprotected forehead, she stopped that behavior pretty quickly. Hiruzen couldn't help but chuckle, and he reveals that he's been feeling nostalgic lately. His grandson Konohamaru had graduated the academy, and he'd begun to train the boy himself. He even mentions that he'd been having the same trouble with him that he'd once had with Jiraiya, and on instinct, he reaches up and ruffles the massive man's shaggy hair. As the sun set, the village lit up with festival lanterns. Citizens and shinobi alike began to crowd around Hokage Tower in anticipation. Currently, Sakura and Ino were scanning all across the venue in search of Naruto. Most in the village had heard rumor of the identity of the new Fire Shadow, but these two knew exactly who thanks to their teacher. And the anticipation of finally seeing their friend Naruto again after so long was starting to get to him. Tsunade, however, would tell them to both calm down and stop fidgeting so much. They straightened up, and Tsunade rewarded the obedience by informing that Naruto had indeed returned with his father, and he had a little friend with him too. She concludes by explaining that he was likely going to stand atop the tower with Jiraiya. Still heeding her orders to be calm, both girls fumed silently to themselves as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Finally, Hiruzen walked out and spoke up, calling the attention of all present, easily projecting his voice out for all to hear as well. He spoke of the worthiness of his successor, and the fact that he more than most exemplified the will of fire. He removes his ceremonial headdress and hands it to the man who had stepped up behind him. Jiraiya's fingers trembled as he reached forward to take hold of the hat. It was heavier than he thought, perfectly embodying the weight of his new position. But slowly he smiled, steadying himself and now ready to leave the village. Hiruzen presented to the Hidden Leaf Village is 5th Hokage, and behind them, on the Hokage monument, ropes holding a large tarp over the newest addition were cut, and officially, the sage joined the ranks of the 4 legendary shinobi who came before him. The village rejoiced, and for the first time in his life, Jiraiya felt a bit overwhelmed by all the attention, but only a tiny bit really. He raised his hand and the commotion settled a bit. Good evening everyone. I just wanted to say that... He paused for a moment and glanced backwards. He saw Naruto and Fu looking at him with pride. I wanted to say that as the great Toad Sage of Mount Miyoboku, and as your 5th Hokage, I will strive to be the man who can best protect our will of fire. I'll usher in a new, unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. And most importantly, I'll foster the embers of the next generation of the Leaf. The crowd cheered louder, and once they calmed enough, Hiruzen declared that this concluded the ceremony. And he, for one, looked forward to seeing exactly what Jiraiya would accomplish, and hopefully, a permanent retirement this time. The rest of the night was to be held as a celebration. The 5th sighed in relief at not botching his first official act on the job, and then realized that Fu and Naruto had already snuck away. Chuckling, he decides to take a page out of their book and celebrate the night with Tsunade and the 3rd. Meanwhile, currently walking the streets of the Leaf with Fu at his side, Naruto was planning to take her to the local ramen stand he'd become a fan of. He had insisted on calling this a date, but she wasn't having it. The two sat down and ordered before discussing the ceremony. Before they were served though, the flaps of the stand sounded, as well as 2 angry feminine screams of Naruto's name. He turned to see Sakura and Ino. Filled with happiness at seeing them again, he lunged from his bar stool to capture them both in a hug, and tell them that he missed them. Their response was not a hug in return though. Ino and Sakura both laid him out with a synchronized jab. Once he was flat on his back, they continued their strange greeting and scolded him for the absolute nerve he had. Almost 3 years no letter or visit, and the first thing he does is run off on some date with some random girl. He didn't even come find Ino. And that's an important distinction to make here. Sakura, having come to cherish Naruto as one of her best friends, was really only mad about the lack of contact, not really any romantic feelings she might have towards Naruto in this timeline. Remember, here she's had time to spend around Sasuke. But the word date was what saved Naruto, or more accurately, Fu laughing at the word date.
Oh, no way. Nuh-uh. Not happening. Naruto's a nice guy and all, and I like him as a friend, but he's lacking something he needs for me to acknowledge him that way.
Though not spared a physical beating, Naruto sat up and again hung his head. Fu watched him with an even gaze, and Sakura and Ino noticed the tension between the two. After a while, Teuchi and Ayame finished their orders and the scent of hot ramen wafts out. Both Naruto and Fu recalled a specific experience they had while in the Hidden Cloud Village, under the tutelage of the Eight-Tailed Jinchuriki. A story for another time, but thinking about it made a smile creep onto Naruto's face. He stands up and beams at Fu, and confidently declares that he'll one day be worthy of her. This actually coaxes a rather embarrassed response from her, and she decides to quickly dig into her meal to not face Naruto directly. It also didn't help that she could hear Chome in her head lightly teasing her. Naruto turned back towards Sakura and Ino with a sincere apology and even offered to pay for their meals if they joined them. Both girls still seemed somewhat mad, but finally relented after enough begging, and told him how lucky he was that absence did somewhat make the heart grow fonder. And first and foremost, he was their friend. Ino genuinely expressed her happiness to see Naruto again. While initially upset, she becomes very intrigued by the chemistry she's seeing between Naruto and Fu, and begins to wonder what sort of bond they share. As the group of four all sat down, the conversation shifted mostly to Fu and how Naruto met her. Courteously, Naruto allowed Fu to do the talking for herself, and as expected, she had the fact of her own Jinchuriki status. She didn't know these two yet, and it made no sense to. And Naruto after his trip couldn't fault anyone for maintaining their privacy. He dug into his ramen, but noticed something wrong. He'd been given pork ramen with a completely raw strip of pork in it. Dissatisfied, he lets Teuchi, the stall owner, know, who in this timeline, remember, he isn't as close to since he didn't grow up in the village. And the old man takes offense to having his ramen criticized. They go back and forth for a while before finally the ramen cook picks up Naruto's bowl and without any fanfare, dumps it on Naruto's head. At this time, the door behind the cooking station out of the stall opened and another Teuchi entered and like everyone else in the room, paused in confused shock. The Teuchi in front of Naruto then poofed and was replaced by a raven-haired Anbu who silently shook with laughter. Fu was fully entertained, as was Ino, and next to them Sakura palms her face while mouthing, "I knew you'd be childish about this." The inside of Ichiraku Ramen became a cacophony of screams, crashes, and bursts of wind. The mysterious Anbu leaps through the entrance and skids to a halt, as Naruto also came barreling out of it, already cocking back a fist and lay him out. When the shadows cast by the street lamps above them were attached to a streaking black line and soon a large black circle upon the ground that rendered them both immobile.
You just got back and you're already causing trouble, Naruto? And Sasuke, I thought you were the mature one.
Naruto was way too angry to properly greet Shikamaru, and instead stressed that he didn't even start. Wait, Sasuke? Sakura then stormed forward and swiped the Anbu mask away.
Welcome back, knucklehead. I saw the ceremony. You certainly looked proud.
Of course, Naruto was shocked to see Sasuke, and more so that he hadn't immediately recognized him. But Sasuke was different now. Not completely, as evident by how he now stood stock still in front of him and endured a dressing down from Sakura that didn't seem like it'd end. Shikamaru finally released his jutsu, and Sasuke reclaimed his mask and poked his teammate in the head to silence her, while Naruto simply stared. Poking fun at Naruto's dazed state, Shikamaru causes the Jinchuriki to question if Sasuke had really made it into the Black Ops. He really did seem surprised by the new rank difference.
Well, you may as well get over it. Everyone else in our class and on Team Guy are Chunin now. Actually, Neji and Sasuke have already achieved Jonin, and I hear Shino is also being considered. Now Asuma is bugging me about all 4 of the current generation having a Jonin already. It's a total drag.
I was inducted into the Anbu the day of the Jonin promotion. It wasn't long ago.
The 3 who had been the first Chunin of their class would pick up right where they had left off. They got Naruto caught up on everything that had changed. Meanwhile, Fu listened in and had Sakura and Ino fill in details themselves. Damn, I can't believe this. Huh? Congrats on your promotion, Sasuke, but don't think I'm gonna let your prank or the gap between us stand though. I'm getting you back, and I'm gonna show you up.
I look forward to watching you attempt both. I'd like to see how strong you've become.
But wait, if you're in the Black Ops now, Sakura's a medic, and Kakashi Sensei's taking up Dad's old position, we all probably won't be teaming up anytime soon, huh? Well, it's nice to see that some things never change. You 3 still get along the same. The silver-haired mentor of this group arrived, and Naruto was once again excited to be reunited with everyone. Kakashi would actually explain that Anbu don't strictly work Black Ops missions all the time. Some of them actually work on reserve duty and can switch back to standard Jonin assignments upon request. And he was actually the one to recommend Sasuke's Anbu promotion because he carried a lot of weight when he served. Besides that, knowing Naruto, he'll likely need a medic on his team anyway, so he won't need to miss Sakura too much. And it seemed he'd already brought a replacement for them if they needed to operate in a 3-man cell again, or in addition if Sasuke could join up. He mentions with a small wave and agreeing to Fu. And most importantly, he had been thinking since Sasuke's promotion, but maybe if they all reached that level, they could form Team 7 as a spy team and work Jiraiya's investigations together. Naruto was intrigued by the idea, and Sakura mentioned being open to it as well. The 2 nod determinedly at each other, excited to reunite their team. The blonde Chunin would then properly introduce Fu to both Sasuke and Kakashi, before asking Kakashi how he and that uncle lady had been, making a rain cloud hang over the man's head, and Sasuke and Sakura give Naruto a leave it alone gesture. After recovering, Kakashi announces that he's finally deploying to further investigate the Akatsuki using the last notes that Lord Fifth handed down to him. Naruto and his other students wish him luck and tell him to come home soon. Meanwhile, in the Sand Village, the 4th Kazekage, still in his position, is filing away mission reports. A task he'd come to enjoy a lot more over the last few years due to the change in Gaara. It was interesting to see the still somewhat cold disposition he'd show his father save the empty use of his title for respect, and then read about how he'd come to fiercely protect his siblings and soon more and more of his comrades in battle. This had been one of the further deciding factors in Raza, helping his son further his training a bit. By using his gold dust, he'd allow Gaara to almost participate in a sort of resistance training for his sand, resulting in greater attack speed and chakra control over it. And likely some new techniques as well. He'd soon realize that Gaara truly was a splendid ninja, very far from a failed experiment. Understandably though, Gaara hadn't instantly warmed up to Raza as a father. At best, he was his superior. Their relationship was purely shinobi and kage. With that bittersweet sentiment, he looked out of his office window and saw a bird not native to the desert and felt something was wrong. Elsewhere in the village, Kankuro and Gaara walked the streets, basically hanging out more or less. Not having been trained for the position of Kage in this timeline, Gaara would have had even more time to grow his social skills, and he'd also get more comfortable with his siblings. But they're drawn out of their conversation when the sounds of explosions erupt overhead, and the darkened village is illuminated for a small while. Knowing the source of the sound and light must have been near Kazekage Tower, Gaara instantly leaps into action by forming a cloud under the two and then flying off. In the air, flashes of gold and more smaller scale explosions go off, as Raza, using the same technique as Gaara, seem to be pursuing an opponent. Gaara and Kankuro then recognize the black cloak and red clouds, and Gaara speeds up. Upon getting closer, it's clear that both had already landed substantial blows. One of the Akatsuki members' arms being damaged, and the fourth now sporting a grisly burn to the side of his body, while bits of molten gold laid all about, but the wind shadow stood tall. The opponents had given each other a bit of room to nurse their wounds, and in that time, the Kage's children arrived at his side. Gaara would strike out with the sand, and the Akatsuki member would back off and fly a bit higher, while Kankuro checked onto the four's wounds. He informs his family members that it doesn't look very good at all. Raz was on his feet because of pure adrenaline. The fourth then orders Kankuro to focus and listen to him. Handle evacuation efforts. This opponent is out of his league. He then turns to Gaara and asks him to back him up in defending the village, and the Jinchuriki simply nods, obviously more worried about the village than the Kage. Perfect. Kankuro would frown in recognition, but faithfully obey his father and leader's commands, fleeing from the tower just as Deidara unleashed another flock of bombs to pepper their current position. Gaara handles the defense this time, but Deidara, having been in this fight longer, takes advantage of the attempt at blocking for the purpose of damaging nearby buildings. It coaxes the exact response he's looking for. Angry at the underhanded trick, the father and son actually act in tandem and use the cloud to rush Datara, who allows them to give chase, now working together to push Datara's agility to his limits. This forces him to dodge just enough that his cloak is being ripped apart and his bird may be damaged multiple times, but he's just barely getting by. Datara at one point is even forced to abandon his bird and traverse the streets on foot while being pursued and forming a new one. The injured Akatsuki takes to the skies again and goes straight up this time, getting struck a few times by Gar and Raza for his trouble, but much more importantly, throwing out a C3 bomb. As Gar didn't cannon, he and the fourth blocked the blast by summoning forth large amounts of gold and sand. But finally, the fourth's wounds begin to take their toll on him. He runs nearly out of all his chakra, and the gold keeping him aloft falls away. Gar, in a single moment of hesitation, lashes out with a sand he would have used to simultaneously defend himself to save the Wind Shadow, getting him in the nick of time before he fell to the ground. Gar then attempted to pull the Kazekage towards him and form a dome of sand, but just before he could, a white bird crossed his line of sight. The Chinchuriki and Kazekage are blown from the flimsy and incomplete dome. In freefall, neither move. Datara would then swoop by and grab Gar with his undamaged hand, in a much worse shape than Cannon, likely leave a trail of blood for a while. The fourth had been abandoned to falls of the sand dunes below, and will be found by Chunin help with the evacuation efforts. Surprisingly, he is still somehow breathing, but is far past critical condition. Meanwhile, just at the outskirts of the village, Datara mourns the loss of his arm, but doesn't fret about it for long, knowing it could be restored. But just then, a claw of sand erupts from the middle of his bird and squeezes down on Datara. Gar then tears his way out of the hole he dug through the bird's body, still clad in heavily cracked and burned stand armor, an ability his training under the fourth had greatly improved. He was however hurt and had been knocked unconscious for a little while. He'd also had to stealthily sneak his way from the bird's claws after Datara had stowed him there. Breathing heavily, as having only felt this kind of pain before once in his life, Gar struggles to his feet to find Datara alive but not moving. Also noting he's only been flown a few miles out from the village. Soon enough, two Chunin body flicker into sight and run towards him, calling for him and asking if he's alright. He recognizes one, but not the other. They get closer and inspect the body of Datara, while Gar begins to wobble on his feet. The two Chunin however support him over their shoulders and decide to take him back and send someone for the terrorist's body. Gar thanks them and asks for an update on the village's condition. The familiar Chunin begins to fill him in. Not long into the walk, the man Gar didn't know would finally look at him, and Gar would realize his eyes didn't look right. And that's when the Chunin, secretly an agent of Sasori, would carry out his mission. Forming a ram seal, he detonates the explosive tags in his pouch, point blank, killing the other Chunin beside him and blasting Gar away and finally knocking him fully unconscious due to all the damage and his already heavily cracked armor. As if on cue, Sasori and his Hiroko puppet would shuffle along before wrapping Gar in his tail and ordering Datara to stop faking and get up. The explosives expert would complain about his ribs aching, but gets no sympathy in return, and he is forced to run and catch up. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we can assume that Kankuro would catch up eventually, and likely put up a better fight, especially in using multiple puppets at once in this timeline, especially considering his feat against Kisame to the point that I believe the Hiroko puppet would take a few critical blows, actually cracking a few of the joints here and there, and this will be very important later on. The main point of this is to say that the stronger Kankuro digs and claws as hard as he possibly can to get Gar back. But realistically, there are just some things he's not going to be able to do against Sasori on his own, even with a bit more strength. It's just not in his wheelhouse originally, and nothing has changed for him to put something new there. The best he can really hope to do here on his own with no real coaching from anybody is just slow up the two. And smartly, Datara would go ahead with the captured Gar and tell Sasori to catch up when he was done. So in this moment, Kankuro kinda gets to embody the thing which Gar and he admittedly saw in Naruto back in the Chunin exams and when he led them in the mission to retrieve Lady Tsunade. Something that we as Naruto fans know to be clichély thrown out as gutsiness. But it is still a very important ideal. But again, inevitably, Kankuro is crushed by defeat and left for dead due to likely still being poisoned. Though he is ignorant of it, he has dealt a critical blow that may lead to victory. Very soon after, medics find him and rush him to the same hospital as his father amongst the chaos. That morning in the Leaf, Naruto and Fu report to Okage Tower in hopes of finding a mission to go on together. But really, just so Naruto could tick his pops off with the purchase he'd made with the last of his money. Orange clothing dye. It wasn't always in stock, but thankfully the local general store had enough to get the job done. And to boot, he was pretty fond of his new outfit now. While Jiraiya, now in the position of an authority figure, is forced to enforce the standards and codes of professionalism, his students just laugh off his grumbling at Naruto. He'd however counter this by sticking them with a mission to help with his paperwork for the day. The two immediately fell in spirit and began to sort mission briefings in urgent forms for Jiraiya, allowing him to kick his feet back and relax. He laughs to himself that this gig did have a few perks to it technically. Soon though, a messenger burst into the office, exclaiming to Lord Fifth that they had urgent word from their ally the Sand Village. The Kazekage had been fatally wounded, and the shinobi Gaara of the Sand kidnapped by the Akatsuki. Immediately, Naruto and Fu were on their feet with heated and enraged eyes, bolting towards the door. Jiraiya orders for them to stop, and Naruto turns back on him, barking that there is no way he's letting Gaara up.
Naruto, I'm assigning you an A-ranked mission. Take Fu and 2 other teammates with you capable of that difficulty. You are to travel to the Hidden Sand Village and provide any aid possible. Once you're there, stand by and act on their orders. Also inform and escort Tamari of the Hidden Sand home. The poor girl probably hasn't heard yet. You need to be there yesterday, so go. I'll assign backup as soon as possible.
The boy nods to his father, and he and Fu speed off with the blonde asking the Seven-Tailed Jinchuriki to go to the hospital and get Sakura. He'd find Sasuke and Tamari and meet them at the gates. Truly rushing, both get to their destinations at high speed, and obviously Sasuke doesn't react well to Naruto banging on his apartment door. He opens up and asks what the issue is, and Naruto speeds through an explanation with a request for Sasuke to join his mission cell. The Uchiha is a little bit hesitant. This isn't his fight and does nothing to directly further his investigation or training, but he does realize that this involves the Akatsuki. That means there's a chance he could see his brother again. Beyond that, it could give him more info on the mysterious Madara and where and who he currently was. For the moment, the other target on his hit list was growing ever closer to his reach. Though most importantly, going would give Naruto much more insurance against the Red Clouds, something he also cared deeply for. He wasn't admitting that out loud though. It seemed preparation for his first Anbu assignment would have to wait then. He looks at Naruto sternly and shuts his door, causing the blonde to bang on it once again. Not long later, it opens again, and Sasuke has readjusted his Zanbu gear, now sends the undershirt due to the coming hot environment. He informs Naruto that he'll join him this time, but if Itachi is involved in this, then his priorities will have to change from saving Gaara to furthering his own goals. Naruto visibly grits his teeth at that, but nods and declares that he understands, which he truly does in this timeline. So in the next few minutes, a strangely assembled Team 7 with Sasuke technically as the leader, and Tamari are found rushing towards the Sand Village in hopes of arriving on time. Naruto and his hastily stitched together team escort Tamari back to the Hidden Sand in an attempt to rescue the kidnapped Jonin Gaara. With Naruto and Fu hurrying the group along, combined with everyone being generally stronger and faster, they make slightly better time than Kennen, cutting the usual day-long journey down by at least 19 hours. That was as fast as Sasuke would allow, as he reminded them there would be work after they got there as well. Upon arriving, with Kakashi nowhere in sight, Shio doesn't freak out, so no time is wasted here. But Sakura, a student of the Slug Princess, is called upon to attempt to deal with the wounds of the 4th Kazekage. Meanwhile, Kankuro is also in critical condition due to attempting the rescue mission on his own. This makes Sakura regretful she never learned a cloning technique. Cool and collected the entire time, Chio intervenes and asks Sakura if she could walk her through the poison extraction technique while she operated. The medic acknowledges that it won't be perfect, but that would be a big help. Outside the operating room, Sasuke attempts to keep Naruto and Fu reined in and also digs up intel from nearby shinobi about the things they'd heard or noticed about the attackers, even going to the place that Gaara had been downed at. There, Sasuke begins to notice the broken shards of the Hiroko puppet leaving a trail in the sand, and he notes to the sand tuning that showed him this to be sure to tell Kankuro he was instrumental in saving his brother. Meanwhile, back in the Leaf, Jiraiya, after numerous more encounters with the Akatsuki when traveling with Naruto and Fu, is seeking out a suitable team to send in for backup. Having heard of the situation by now, Hiruzen had joined his student in the office, but with him came Danzo and the other elders, making this an emergency meeting. Jiraiya is instantly set upon by the council for sending up the Nine-Tailed Jinchuriki directly into the crosshairs of the Akatsuki, but Jiraiya flippantly tells them to whine to him later he doesn't have time for bureaucracy right now, and goes back to looking at his active registry. He notices that Uncle Mitarashi has ascended to full Jonin rank recently. Apparently, his teacher was correct about her and Kakashi's relationship leading to development. Team Guy was on their way back to the village according to one of the mission reports he'd read, and the likes of Team 8 and Team 10 were not all assembled. He asks Hiruzen who Anko has a good track record of working with, and his predecessor recalls that Anko had taken the former sound ninja Kensuchi under her wing after Ibiki Marino was named her parole officer. He'd been attempting to form a team under her, but the woman had apparently rejected most applicants he'd attempted to force onto her. "Either too boring or too weak," she would say. Jiraiya's sweat drops, heaving a bit of Orochimaru in that phrase. The Dark Shadow of the Leaf, seeing a chance to impugn Jiraiya in front of the elders, decides to use a bit of his gathered intel and be helpful to Jiraiya. "Well, Lord Fifth, Miss Mitarashi has shown a particular interest in offering parole to Orochimaru's elite squad that had been captured during the mission to retrieve Lady Tsunade. The ones who would have likely had a hand in the attempted Leaf Crush plan. The same group your poorly trained weapon decided to spare." Jiraiya met Danzo's gaze with a serious expression. "Naruto informed me he wanted to look into the curse mark and see if there's a way to remove them." A slight smile broke his demeanor. "Uncle wants them as her proteges, huh? That sounds like a great idea, Elder Shimura."
All 4 elders stood up in surprise as Jiraiya called in a temporary attendant and sent him to fetch Anko Mitarashi and inform her of the mission parameters and freedom to choose 2 members of the Sound 4 to accompany her and Kintsuchi. He was also to inform her that Team Guy would be right behind them once they arrived back to the village. He had a feeling that not covering all his bases could end in a particularly bad way this time. Considering all the bickering and stammering going on, he's also rather glad he's neglected to mention who and what Fu really is, other than referring to her as an apprentice from the Hidden Waterfall village. Anko is contacted for a special assignment. Hearing the details, a fire is lit under her. She can finally give those kids their second chance, and she knew just who to bring. First, she traveled to Ibiki's and recruited her first protege. It wasn't hard for these two to gravitate towards each other when facing the same stigma, and Ibiki and Anko were co-workers and friends. So for Ken, this was kinda like having an aunt. Once everything is explained, Ken gets suited up, and the two travel to the prison with orders for the release of 2 Sound 4 members. Anko's first pick, the fiery Tayuya. When interrogating the Sound 4, she found herself most drawn to the girl out of every one of them. She didn't seem to share Jirobo's greed, Seikon and Ukon's pride, or Kidomaru's cold intellect. She was simply getting by the best way she could. It was relatable, and it made Anko sure this girl had more to her. She'd speak with her more and more to the point that Tayuya actually isn't surprised to be woken up by Anko and gives her a usually crass hello. She as well as briefed but flat out refused to go along and risk her own neck for random people, much less the guy that captured her. Anko, however, sweetens the pot by dangling Tayuya's parole in front of her face. This would really knock her case out of the park and give her a chance to get fresh air as well. Undeniably, Tayuya can't fault the reasoning with that, but she can call Anko outside of her name. The two get into an insult war as Ken looks back and forth, slightly interested. Their final team member is let out. Jirobo looks a bit leaner without the same food intake as Kanon, and he would be almost 3 years older here. He also doesn't seem very happy and didn't speak until he heard Tayuya's foul mouth and went to chastise her. As soon as he did, Anko set upon him for the redhead, putting him right in his place and making sure he understood that a step out of line in this circumstance meant he may not get to come back. I have no doubt that Anko could be very teacherly and wise if she needs to be, but also be able to turn that on a dime if the case calls for it. Jirobo will remember that for now, and Team Anko sets out. Tayuya protested she be given a flute since they've already been given their gear back for their assignment, but Anko apologizes that she wasn't given that authorization, but she would trust her with one of her kunai pouches. A small consolation to Tayuya, but beggars can't be choosers. And with his backup sent, Jiraiya finally offers the elders his ear to chew off. He looks off in the distance and prays that Naruto and Fu keep cool heads. Meanwhile, after the operations, Sakura finishes the preparations of her antidotes for Sasori's poison, and she is still able to make 3 doses in total. As soon as she is done, Sasuke is unable to pacify Naruto and Fu any longer, and Temari is honestly just as revved up. But like in canon, Granny Chiyo interjects and orders Temari to stay back for border defense. With the information he gathered from investigating and the use of his Sharingan, Sasuke is able to find Sasori and data his trail fairly simply. Remember, this is also a version of Sasuke looking to do Black Ops work and having more training under an international spy version of Kakashi. There could be delays this timeline faces that we simply can't account for though. None that I think impact the time of arrival too significantly. Except for, even with the changes we've seen in this timeline, the duo of Kisame and Itachi are still the ones who step in with their decoy sacrifices. And remember, with them having failed to deal with Naruto and Gaara once before, the two would have even more motivation to in fact, in this timeline, I believe they will both sacrifice at least 50% of their total chakra for their clones. And what's more, this would most likely be a slightly stronger Kisame, due to the interest he'd taken in the so-called Battle of a Dinosaur and Flies. Inventive strategy and the guts and ability to just barely pull it off intrigued him. It made him think those kids may be even more worth tearing to shreds in the future. Itachi didn't share the same passion though, and if anything, seemed as disinterested in his brother as always, even after he'd helped the Nine-Tails escape. He was only doing this as part of the job and taking the precautions necessary for it. Nothing more, nothing less. So standing in the path of Naruto's team is Itachi Uchiha. Sasuke's reaction is very measured and controlled to his credit this time around. He immediately activates his eyes and orders his teammates to keep their eyes off his face and hands. Fu does neither, with full knowledge that Chome would awaken her as soon as she was hit with anything, one of the many benefits of her training under Master B. Naruto had no such luck, and like Sakura and Chiyo, begrudgingly heeded Sasuke's words and got on his guard, putting his head down.
Step aside, little brother. This time, you won't see any mercy from me.
You all go ahead. This is my role, not yours. Don't argue with me, Naruto and Sakura.
Sakura and Naruto flinch the preemptive order. The two silently exchange a glance and move out, understanding that they weren't as suited for this confrontation as Sasuke had been, not doubting one bit the excruciating training Sasuke had gone through in preparation for this exact opponent.
though they really didn't like it. Naruto turns and tells Sasuke, "You better catch up." Team Anko had crossed into the land of wind by this time, but their procession was halted by the appearance of Kisame Hoshigaki. Recognizing the cloak, the team was battle ready, but the call of the blue beast of the leaf interrupted them. Team Guy didn't have much time to analyze Anko's current team, as Lee, Neji, and Tenten recognized their opponent. Kisame's eyes widened in delight at seeing at least two of the flies bigger and stronger. Lee informs his sensei of his opponent's identity, and in response, Guy tells Anko and crew to go on ahead of them. He's excited to test his team against the man who'd inspired such youthful training vigor in his students. The Jonin Kunoichi Rogers vet encourages the team along.
"I'm excited to play with you flies again. I'm sure you'll be even more fun to shred up this time."
He threatens towards Neji and Lee, who at first pay no attention to the bait. It is Guy who advised that the two test their training on the opponent that inspired them in the same manner. Tenten and he would hang back and intervene only if necessary. Regardless, it wasn't as if Kisame was in a position to negotiate terms. Lee diligently replies and says about removing his now much heavier weights. Neji, though a bit more aloof, does the same, revealing himself to have adopted Lee and Guy's weight training and his closer training with them over the past few years in this timeline. Then, he and Lee, side by side, burst forward to attack Kisame together. But even with that burst of speed, Kisame easily blocked both blows and went on to block every subsequent blow from their resulting flurries. But while this happened, he couldn't draw Samehada. Lee opened up the first and second gates as quick as he could, and let the bandages on his hands unravel and tangle up Kisame's hands as he blocked with them. Putting on an even larger burst of speed as the third gate was forced open, he jumps directly over Kisame and a tree branch, yanking the Akatsuki against it, while Neji lunged forward while Kisame's body was nice and open, and unleashed a rotation in midair, forcing Kisame's body through the tree and snapping another one behind him. As the water clone they just defeated burst, Neji and Lee showed no surprise due to the Byakugan. When Kisame once again showed the gap between them and sped in front of them for a surprise swipe, Neji again reacted with a rotation to guard he and Lee. Samehada cut clean through the chakra, bursting the dome and revealing only Neji inside, or so he thought. The dancing Lee shadow was unleashed upon him, and the well-placed kick to the jaw came with Neji sending a bolt of destructive chakra through Samehada to damage Kisame's arm, only for Kisame to stomp his feet to the ground and regain his footing, and force Lee to the ground while releasing his grip on Samehada for an instant. His free hand then took hold of the upper half of the fallen tree, and easily wielding it like Master Sword himself, got ready to crush the two younger shinobi. Guy finally felt it necessary to step in and appeared next to his students, dropping into a very deep squat to hold up the log from crushing them. Tenten, seeing a perfect opening, unsheathed her sword and sped forward to take a swipe at Kisame's neck, while he strained against her male teammates. She followed through with her blade, only for the shark to react by snapping it in half with his own teeth and flicking the blade at her, nearly too quick for her to dodge. This actually caused one of her hair buns to be cut and one side of her hair to fall loose for her trouble. However, Kisame still has to deal with her long-range attacks, and from here, I think the fight will become incredibly similar to the canon version that we saw. It all fit pretty well, make a simpler ending, and it also still shows that this version of Team Guy and this version of Kisame have gotten a bit stronger, since the entirety of Team Guy working together to take on this more bloodthirsty Kisame.
This was fun, kiddos, but just so it's clear, from here on out, every fly that opposes the Akatsuki will be squished, because next time I won't be sending a sacrifice, and I'll see you again as well, Beast of the Leaf.
With enough time bought for Datara and Sorcery, the tailless-tailed beast releases his sacrifice. With it being a much harder fight, all of Team Guy is pretty wiped out right now, so they decide to take a bit of time to recuperate here, as Team Anko has already gone ahead. Back with Team Anko, they arrive at the Akatsuki hideout and discover the seal being employed there, as Naruto and the rest of his team arrive, sans Sasuke. He's surprised to see Anko as their backup, and nearly makes a stupid comment about why Fishnet Sensei was here, before he struggled to recall who the hell Jirobo was, but instantly recognized Toyuya, who was laughing at the title Fishnet Sensei. Sakura, having trained under Anko and knowing her credentials as well as her relationship with Kakashi, doesn't spare any thought on it and interrupts Naruto to discuss the seal. This conversation would go about the same as canon, and we have the conclusion of Team Anko being the ones to go and deal with the 4 seals, while Naruto and Ko remain there and take out the 5th one in tandem with them, via the wireless radios. Anko tries to get Naruto to agree to wait for Guy to catch up, but Naruto and Fu aren't having that. They need to get in there as soon as possible. Naruto takes Kakashi's place in tearing off the seal, and Sakura destroys the boulder. Like in canon, the clones of those who tore off the surrounding seals appear, and Team Anko engages their opponent. Beforehand, inside the cave, and just after the draining of Shukaku, the Akatsuki speak to one another. The leader commends Itachi and Kisame for buying them enough time to get the One-Tails out. He fears they may not have without the interference. Kisame is only irritated and complains that they should have just gone in person. Already fed up with the difficulty this mission has demonstrated, Sasori asks Itachi and Kisame, as well as Hidan and Kakuzu, what kind of a Jinchuriki the 9 and 7 tails are. At the order of the leader, Itachi speaks.
He's A loud and gutsy animal that shouldn't be backed into a corner.
Confused, the artistic partners ask for more to go on, but Itachi and Kisame end their transmission. Hidan pipes up that the Seven Tails could be a perfect practitioner of the way of Jashin, citing how she so willingly accepted them as her killers. She was so ready to accept sweet, exquisite pain. Kakuzu snaps at him to shut his mouth and addresses Deidara and Sasori.
That girl became a perfect Jinchuriki, and that Nine-Tails brat had something to do with it. Do not take them lightly.
Deidara, now with a replacement cloak, grows ever excited at the prospect of taking on an opponent who escaped the oh-so-great Itachi. An opponent who would even interfere with Hidan and Kakuzu's attempt on the Seven Tails. Finally, with this victory, his art would be undeniably supreme and sublime, meaning he'd hold nothing back in the coming fight. With a loud crash, the rock cylinder of the entrance crumbles away to reveal Naruto and company. Seeing Deidara sit on Gaara's body, Naruto barks out in fury, and it seemed he and Fu were just about to rush him when he proactively expanded a clay bird and mounted it.
Sasori, my man, I'll leave this gallery to you. It's too cramped for my art.
Huh. The bird went zooming over the intruders' heads and caused Deidara to duck his own and hug close to the bird so they could skip the ceiling and stay out of reach. Seeing him with Gaara's body still in tow, Naruto and Fu hone in on them when Sakura protests. Though Naruto tells her not to worry due to her having backup now. In front of him came Sasuke, his sword still out and Sharingan still activated, and his gear a bit roughed up with the thoughtful look in his eyes. We gotta get Gaara back! Don't sweat it, backup is coming, and you got this guy on your side! After assuring Sakura and Chio and fist-bumping Sasuke, he and Fu bolt past them. The seven-tailed Jinchuriki didn't get time to spread her wings since she was out of sight now. The two were so focused on the bird flying ahead of them and Deidara's cloak swaying in the wind behind it that they were completely caught off guard by the absolute hail of spider bombs from above them. He jumped off the bird as soon as he left the cave and pinned his cloak to it to keep their eyes drawn on it. With just enough time to react, Fu had no choice but to roughly grab Naruto and go bolting off to the sky to flee. Finally planned, Deidara's bird had already circled back and allowed him to hop back on, letting the long-range bomber get behind the two in an aerial fight. A bad position to be in. While this version of Deidara isn't in any significant way stronger than his canon version, his approach to this particular fight is going to be way different than what we saw in canon at this point. Think more his fight with Sasuke than his fight with Kakashi and Naruto, when he even got to take a breather as Kakashi had to wrangle his student in a bit. With a simple yet dastardly plan, Deidara has put himself in perfect position to assault the two with clay birds and corral them where he liked. He still wasn't fully recovered from taking on the Kazekage and One-Tails at the same time, and had done his homework on these two as well. He'd keep the close-range fighter Naruto pinned down and force the perfect Jinchuriki to waste their energy to protect him. Then he'd get them both when they were nice and softened up for him, because obviously backing 3 Jinchuriki in a row was amazing motivation.
When do you think that backup will get here, Naruto? We can't run forever and you're heavy!
Fishnet Sensei and her crew probably ran into trouble from disrupting that seal, and she said Super Bushy Brow Sensei took on Itachi's partner. Gaara told me that guy's a real monster. I think this one's up to us for now.
I'm just asking to know how far I need to go. I could probably bring Chomei out right now and blow him to bits for what he did, but working with you is cool too. What are you thinking?
Not quite sure we need to go that far, Fu, but the good news is you're a great matchup for this guy. I have some ideas, and a secret weapon. As they fled and Naruto detailed his first plan, Fu nodded and began to fly through the same chasm Deidara had, weaving past the large logs Kakashi and Naruto had bounded off of in canon to avoid being blown out of the sky, as Deidara only increased the intensity of his assault. As he flew past one of the logs, he noticed Fu's hands, now empty. The missing Naruto had stuck himself onto the back of the log and bolted up as soon as the Akatsuki member flew over him. He then caught him by surprise in a sleeper hold. This allowed Naruto to yank him off his bird and perform what basically amounts to a high-altitude version of Dolph Ziggler's zigzag in midair. As he and Deidara careen towards the ground, he taunts him and forms a Shadow Clone hand sign. You like blowing stuff up, right? Well, check this out! Super Explosive Clone Body Slam! A troop of Narutos burst to life, with one grabbing the real one and throwing him away from the pile. These clones weren't like the ones he used for his Naruto-style clone explosion before the time skip. He learned to make true explosive clones by having them detonate the chakra given to them extremely violently. Deidara is driven into the ground from high up and covered in clones. It only gets worse for him as he looks up to see Fu's beetle strength, allowing her to grab Gaara's body from the bird's clutches and choke the thing. Spinning quickly, she flings it towards the super explosive dog pile, and Deidara's eyes widen.
What beautiful art.
Naruto had rolled through his landing and gone running, but hadn't gotten far enough to escape the shockwave of the high-yield explosion fully. Picking himself up and dusting off, he was pretty far certain that guy wouldn't get out of that. They'd only seen long-range techniques from him, and that explosion took out a good wide area, so they should be covered even if he had substituted himself somewhere. Plan number 1. Blow him to pieces with something he won't see coming. Success.
I like plan number 1. I didn't know you were a junior artist, Nine-Tails.
From directly under him came Deidara's voice, and soon the ground burst up as he fled. A giant dragon was the Akatsuki member's current ride, and with Fu not around due to getting Gaara's body someplace safe, Naruto retreats into the nearby trees as fast as he can, while hoping Fu is quick about it. All while Deidara resumes his deadly game of tag. Back in the cave with Sasori, Sasuke stands beside Chiyo and Sakura, now setting his eyes upon Sasori and asking Chiyo to give him critical information on him. She'd instantly mention his age and the fact that the shell in front of him is actually a puppet, something Sasuke had actually guessed.
Is that you, Granny? My, you've grown so disgusting. Get out of my sight.
Hey, your grandmother is here in front of you, alive. Watch how you speak to her.
Itachi's brother.
After defending the first swipe of Hiriko's tail, the Uchiha thrusted away from he and his comrades, and rushed Sasori as a gray and black streak. Knowing the Sharingan would give ample time to dodge it, Sasori manipulated Sasuke's position in midair by opening Hiriko's mouth and spitting out poison-coated Sinbone in an immense spray that actually overwhelmed Sasuke and skewered him. The vision of Sasuke faded into cherry blossom petals, as Sakura formed a hand seal which caused more illusions of her beloved to appear and give the real one cover, while she ran the opposite direction of Chiyo for their own pincer maneuver. This allowed someone to draw the fire of the mouth and tail, and hopefully allow Sakura to get close and land a single devastating blow after supporting Sasuke. Sasori, however, dealt with the three-pronged attack better than anyone had anticipated. He cut down Sakura's Sasuke illusions and defended his grandmother's mother and father puppets fairly well, though he'd be forced to reveal the full body of the puppet while doing so. It gave Sasuke a big target to look at, as he gave in a bit to the anger his anticlimactic reunion with Itachi had brought on. He didn't care much for what he'd had to say at all, and since he wasn't here, Sasori was the best thing to take his anger out on. Which is why Sasuke showed no mercy and broke his promise to Kakashi very early on, letting his Mangekyo activate with reckless abandon, and projecting a small amount of black flame directly onto the big Oni mask on Hiriko's back. Quickly wreathed in the black flame, the Hiriko puppet begins to burn from it, as Sasori would have not expected the Amaterasu, especially with Itachi saying nothing of it. No, he couldn't allow his main body to touch the flame. Sasori opens the hatch in the back and jumps up and out of it, but his eyes widen, as Sakura had seemingly used another genjutsu to switch herself out and stand on the ceiling, waiting for a chance to strike, and she'd been set up perfectly by Sasuke in this instance. In midair and caught off guard, Sasori is nearly blasted by her monstrous strength, and saved only by his own experience. He'd already released his prized puppet the moment he'd escaped Hiriko, and allowed it to block the blow for him with a bit of iron sand, only compacting under the force and not cutting this time. Just then, a bolt of iron sand almost impaled Sakura, if not for Chiyo attaching a chakra thread to her and yanking her back just in time. She realized the danger and that Sasori's iron sand is soaked in poison. She advised that the fight is about to get a whole lot harder as the three regroup. Meanwhile, fighting the clones produced from the seals, Anko has quickly realized they're all going to have trouble fighting mirror matches. She orders her team to converge on her position where they will all switch opponents. That trouble is certainly true for her, and in a situation where she is very much trying to prove herself, literally fighting herself and losing is infuriating. This had to look good in the mission report for her next step forward. In fact, she needed to win flawlessly, but her opponent could counter everything she had with equal power. Desperation was piled onto an ever-growing mountain of issues. Her desire to get stronger to complete her main goal, her affection for Ken and Tsuyu, and intention to keep guiding them, and admittedly, her hope to get something useful out of her time with Kakashi. With that came an instinctive and poorly thought out plan. After clashing with her doppelganger once again and being sent back, Anko quickly ran through hand signs of ox, hare, and monkey. With nearly 3 years spent training around Kakashi and Sasuke in this timeline, I believe Anko would finally take steps towards full Jonin level, and attempt to learn a second change in chakra nature, as hard as that'd be for her. As such, I don't think she'd have amazing mastery over the element yet at all, and that's if you count her non-canon fire release from the anime as well. But she's seen a similar technique so many times from just helping Sasuke prepare for the Chunin exams years ago, and even more when Kakashi and Sasuke trained over the last few years. So when trying to catch her perfect copy off guard with a move neither actually knew, a technique that was far faster than she was used to was definitely the way to go to her. And so, a decently potent amount of lightning chakra shrouds her hand, and the sound of birds chirping echoes around the area. But as she moves forward to deliver the thrust, Anko becomes completely aware why the Sharingan is so important to the technique. Her perception can't keep up, and her body definitely can't. So she sloppily charges forward and just successfully catches the clone off guard. The next thing Anko knows, she speared her hand through the copy's neck and actually driven it back into a tree and put her hand through it as well, leaving the clone headless and her hand broken. But at least she pulled out her victor. Anko's actions had only just registered, and she began to curse up a storm at the realization of using Kakashi's technique to win a very tough battle, something that with the current strain of their relationship, she is not very happy about. She continues to curse up a storm until Tsuyu's voice brings her back into the action, where she notices 2 pairs of all 3 of her wards coming towards her. Tsuyu and Jirobo both instantly locked onto one another, or their clones. Unsure and uncaring, Jirobo simply bum rushed the pair of Tsuyu's with a big tackle, one being caught off guard by it due to focusing on the other one and being crushed by him, and the real one sliding under the brute's legs and in front of the Jirobo clone, who wasn't paying her any mind. Without a good flute, Tayuya is forced to rely on simple tricks with a pair of kunai, but she can still enhance herself with chakra and strike Jorobo's clone where she knew him to be the weakest. First sliding through the clone's legs as well, she stops her momentum by stabbing both of the clone's feet and twisting the knife sharply. She then swings up and takes out the back of his knees before clamping her legs onto his throat, and then takes out the space connecting the arm and shoulder. Immobilized, outflexed, and outsped, the brute's copy is also dispatched. Anko had tucked away her injured hand and used her striking shadow snakes in Ken's direction. Her first protege weaves herself expertly through the serpents, but this gets her doppelganger snared up by them, just before it can snipe her in the back with a well-placed sinbone. This also allows Ken to capitalize with a killing blow similar to Tayuya. A kunai produced instead of a sinbone, and thrown with accuracy coached by Anko. The kunai hits true, and the trap is destroyed for all of them. Anko sighs relief and happiness when Jorobo suddenly turns on them all. Using the chakra he'd eaten from Tayuya's copy, he speeds over and clamps his large hand around Ken's throat just as she landed, and used his other arm to take a big hold of Anko's snakes. Both began to be heavily drained of chakra by a near-starving Jorobo, and Tayuya voiced her dismay. Jorobo begins to explain his desire to return to their old master, but he has to dodge 2 kunai lobbed at his head, as the redhead stalked closer to him, as if uncaring about the danger it placed her in to be unarmed. He tried to reason and plead with her, but the last statement Jorobo would ever hear was spoken coldly, as Tayuya brought her lips together and substituted her flute with a whistle. With the medium of sound, the genjutsu is placed on him, and Jorobo is sent into an illusion that overwhelms him and takes the ultimate toll on him. Ken and Anko sigh in relief as Tayuya stands over them, but focuses solely on Jorobo, lying there still. She even spares a moment to spit on his lifeless body. Anko admonishes the ones to know more about the mole Jorobo alluded to, but focuses more on the bright side and thanks Tayuya for her help, which is accepted begrudgingly by her, until Ken reminds him of their comrades. As Anko's team returns to the hideout, Team Guy had finally moved to do so as well, after taking a rest and time for 10-10 to tend to Lee and Guy's injuries, enhanced with pinpoint acupuncture guided by Neji, though it had taken some significant time. But Lee declared they could trust Naruto not to fail. Naruto was going to fail if he couldn't sneak past Deidara and catch a ride with food. The problem was, Deidara was downing every tree he tried to take cover in or jump from. He'd be sure to pester his father to teach him the toe flatness technique if he got out of this. With all the commotion though, it becomes very easy for Fu to find Naruto after stashing Gaara. The Jinchuriki reaches out to her tailed beast, who happily lends her the requested chakra. A 4-tailed cloak erupts over her, and her wings gain more size and strength. Surging forward, a boom is produced as she rounds on Deidara, pursuing the predator and striking out with a super enhanced double fan slash towards the dragon's wings. This actually severs them. The dragon, however, dropped to the ground and began to weave and slither through the trees like a traditional Chinese dragon would, its rider spinning and firing off 2 snake bombs to coil around and immobilize the flying enemy. The explosion goes off and seemingly hits true, but a sparking noise and a flex of her wings blows the smoke away and reveals Fu to have taken the blast.
Chomei's horn!
A construct of a rhinoceros beetle's horn appears above her head formed out of chakra and begins to surge with electricity. She once again resumes her headlong charge, this time ready to impale Deidara. The Akatsuki member just nearly sidesteps her, and Fu goes shooting past him, actually grabbing up Naruto and allowing them to really easily regroup. Deidara quickly thinks up another idea and measures how much clay he has left. Eating up a good chunk of it, he creates his clay dolls and has them begin spreading and destroying one another to lay a network of impromptu mines, while the dragon still has the capacity to shoot out smaller bombs from his mouth. The 2 Jinchuriki are forced to evade all of this, while Deidara begins to form another C3 bomb. He climbs onto his dragon's tail, just as the mighty beast finally nails Fu directly with an explosion, forcing her to cover Naruto and go skidding onto the ground and into Deidara's doll net. The dragon stops galloping on a dime and rears up on its front legs to fling Deidara high into the air. It then begins to tumble right towards Naruto and Fu, and with this combined with the net of explosives and the fling of his C3 bomb, he'd ensure his victory. Survive this, my junior artist! Even if you don't, we can always recapture the reformed 9 and 7 tails together so we're in perfect order. The landscape is rocked as Deidara goes all out on 2 of the upper third of Jinchuriki, but something peculiar began to happen. The flames from his explosion began to absorb in on themselves, until revealing a charred and burned Naruto and Fu, sporting a good deal of bumps and bruises, and around them 3 of Jiraiya's flame absorption seals. Plan number 2, take a hit and let the seals suck up the explosion, except I only had 3 of those. I think we underestimated that last one.
Ow! Yes! We did it! You even used up your deal with the 9 tails, and I burned through a lot of chakra to make it out of that. Explosions are more than just heat, you know.
So that wasn't even your technique, you little weasel? I can't stand losers like you who get in the way of others' art. I'm all in on killing you now. Seemingly unhappy by the means of survival, Deidara had finally had it and began to stuff his mouth with his own clay. This caused him to begin puking it up into what became a huge Deidara that the Jinchuriki stared up at. The 2 scramble back to their feet and take off running as fast as they possibly can, instead of sticking around to see what the technique did. They had just made it back onto the path towards the hideout when the giant Datara seemingly burst with no real explosive behind it. Was it a dud? The two got on guard, assuming the real one had laid it as a trap to grab their attention and sneak behind them. What they didn't notice, however, was all the wildlife in a wide radius expanding directly towards them, disintegrating at a microscopic level. The real Datara watches from the highest point of the chasm they'd fought by, doing so to escape his bomb's radius by being too high for it to reach him, and he watches delightedly as the Jinchuriki are nearly within range when an unfamiliar voice yells out to the two. It was Neji who called out, and then it was Rock Lee who came speeding by them before grabbing both of their hands and dashing away from the danger zone. Datara began cursing as he watched his plan fail due to petty interference. Realizing he definitely didn't have much clay left after making a small bird to get on top of the chasm after all his big moves, he had one attack left, and it pained him to possibly need to rely on it. Retreat had become less and less of a glorious option for him, and the leaf was now overwhelming him with numbers. Back in Sasori's cave, it's very unlikely he'd be able to do much better than he did in canon. There are more opponents to worry about this time around, and one of them is this version of Sasuke. Couple that with him and Sakura boasting excellent teamwork and a chance to counteract his poison if need be, and you end up with a scenario that's a pretty easy win for them in the end. Even if Sasori is gunning harder for them, I don't think it would change too much, but I think it would change something, which could cause a really big ripple effect. The third Kazekage puppet would pose a seriously major threat until Sasuke likely comes up with a way to smash it, noting that it's a powerful yet fragile weapon when it really comes down to it, and prioritizing getting Sakura close to it to safely land a blow and break it apart. Then in the chaos of Sasori's 100 Puppet Show, through his more aggressive behavior, and even his wariness in taking on Uchiha, Sasori presses the trio very hard with his attacks. With such sharp, coordinated, and fast attacks, Sasuke has to worry about dodging and countering for himself a bit more than he'd like to. Sakura is also putting her medic training under Tsunade with rivals to work, and doing as much to dodge as she possibly can as well. But it's Granny Chiyo who suffers the most, as she still attempts to coach her allies through the fight, and so Sasori in this timeline ruthlessly deals a fatal injury to Chiyo and keeps her far away from Sakura for healing. Chiyo will be forced to deal with the injury herself and expend a great deal of chakra, and so the use of her 10 puppets slows down drastically, leaving her tools mostly intact. Having had enough, Sasuke tells Sakura to go for one last combo attack, and attempts to use the body flicker technique while simultaneously slashing out with a Chidori extended blade. This puts a lot of pressure on Sasori as he zips around the cave while Sakura still uses the cherry blossom illusions. This allows him to very easily defend everyone from the puppets coming at them. The frantic clash of techniques had caused Sasori and the majority of his puppets to all bunch up in the eye of the storm, and with all the cherry blossom clones around, cherry blossom petals had begun to literally storm around them, and he finally realized they were coated in some form of oil. By that point, Sasuke would become extremely tired from attempting to mimic Shisui body flicker technique. He simply isn't as fast as the originator, and so he has to expend much more chakra for an overall less effective maneuver. But with the last of his strength, Sasuke just finishes the hand signs for a classic yet nearly perfected fireball technique, and this causes a beautiful pink and red blaze to erupt and consume nearly every puppet in the oil-enhanced inferno, and those that escaped were quickly mowed down by Sakura.
Cherry Blossom Bonfire!
Sakura was snapped out of her cheering by a poke from Sasuke, and instantly went to dealing with Lady Chiyo's wounds. Sasuke, however, was aware that Sasori wasn't done yet, as the Akatsuki had switched himself with an only moderately burned puppet under a red cloak. It bum-rushed the tired Sakura to cut her down when Chiyo surprisingly stepped in even before Sasuke could. The beaten and nearly destroyed mother and father puppets embraced their child for the final time, impaling his cores in the canon timeline. Sasuke questioned Sasori. He asked for any information he has on Danzo Shimura, dirt, something deeply incriminating, and something he can easily prove. If he couldn't get that out of him, he demands to know any information on Mamoru Uchiha. But surprisingly, Sasori offers a sort of reward for defeating him. He's much too impatient to keep up with every little detail about old disgusting men. If he wanted dirt, he had a rendezvous with a spy in Orochimaru's midst at Tenchi Bridge in 10 days. Get in with the snake, and he could find out all the dirty secrets of anyone he liked. Sasori then looks to his grandmother and bids her an almost stranger's farewell. The old woman chastises him and declares she'll soon follow him where he goes to ensure he learns his lesson this time. Team Anko arrive back at the hideout and hear the rest of this exchange. Anko seems even more troubled by hearing her old master's name brought up twice in one day. But behind her, Tenten came running up and yelling, explaining that they had to all get out of this area according to Neji. When asked why, she explains the fight with the other Akatsuki is coming to an explosive ending. Hiding in the woods beside the chasm as he makes a plan, Datara hears a twig snap behind him and turns just in time to see Guy charging at him. His gates now only open to the 5th this time. The Taijutsu specialist struck out at him. He jumps back to decrease the force of the blow, knowing the effects of the last technique to still be in effect. In a last bit to counter, he whistles and signals for the bird that he'd flown up there with to come and catch him and keep him aloft. but Guy went on to lunge at him and try and attack once again across the chasm. Datara correctly predicts this and sends the bird right into Guy's face. Just before they collide, both shinobi cover their face and chest and are blown to the opposite sides of the chasm. Datara rolls through his momentum and rips through his own shirt. The Leaf were piling up, and from what he learned, the Jinchuriki wouldn't let up on him anytime soon either. Like clockwork, the two came bolting up the wall of the canyon in their own pincer attack, just as he bites through the throat in his chest and feeds the rest of his clay to a mouth there on it.
Plan number 3, team up with Guy Sensei and go for the classic finisher.
Fu and Naruto had just closed in on him. He could feel the wind rushing from Naruto's Rasengan and sparks from Fu's horn technique. The two instantly took notice of the strange state his body had taken on, now able to actually see through his skin and view the veins under it. Where his heart was meant to be, lie the core of a dense and explosive ball of chakra, simply waiting for detonation. It caused them both to cancel their attacks and leap back in caution once again. The irony of using the technique he's created to kill Itachi instead to outshine him wasn't lost on Datara. I mean, look at what he's about to accomplish. He's already captured one of the Jinchuriki that Itachi and his partner couldn't catch in this timeline, and now he's about to make it even easier to deal with the other one, and one of the stronger ones as well. In a very literal sense, this course of action gains him more notoriety for his art than his canon retreat would, and he's motivated enough to follow through now obviously. He smiles proudly while staring Naruto in the eye, and fading away even more until only the core remained. But he drove in one last hateful goad. Absolutely drunk off glory and self-satisfaction, Datara asks a simple question rather than taunting as his final act. Everyone knew that art was an explosion by now.
How does it feel to know that you failed that noble Jinchuriki?
The words sent literal shockwaves through Naruto's mind. Datara had hit just the right chink in his armor to leave him stunned without even making contact with him. In vain, Fu yelled for his attention until finally grabbing his hand and once again running off with him. With Chomei having a small bit to recover, she was able to spread her wings a final time and nearly take off. After checking that the rest of Team 7, Anko, and 9 had cleared the area, the order of Neji from a safe distance away and playing Eye in the Sky for his team once again goes out. He communicates via radio to Lee that he was correct about the final trump card that Datara must have been stowing away. He becomes frantic though as the massive amount of condensed chakra in one spot causes his eyes to burn, forcing him to shut the Byakugan off and cover his face. As he yells for Lee to pull the cord and get their comrades out of there. With all that time spent training together with a more positive relationship, Neji and Lee dig and scratch as hard as they can to bring their comrades home alive after another confrontation with the Akatsuki, the exact reason for their training, and neither will let it go to waste, doing what they can instead of hoping to miraculously pull out a win with something out of their depth. With practice synchronicity, Rock Lee bursts into the 8 gates, thankful he never put his weights back on since the battle against Kisame's clone. Just as Fu had gotten herself off the ground, a green blower had snatched her and Naruto from the air and gone running down the side of the chasm at limit-breaking speeds, and proceed to run up the other side, grabbing onto the resting Guy Sensei as the explosion goes off. Neji seemed concerned, but neither he nor Lee knew the blast radius they needed to escape. Lee was going off the last few explosions he'd heard of or seen the effects of and decided the distance must have been quite great. The shinobi could all see the powerful blue explosion expanding towards them at high speed, and it seemed very likely that Lee wouldn't make it in time. Naruto is still nearly numb to the world, even with Fu calling his name. His heart aches and a voice growls from inside him.
Didn't you say you wouldn't fail? Raise your head, fool.
Roaring back to life, Naruto orders Lee to jump, and his contemporary with full faith does so. Flying through hand seals, Naruto completes the summoning jutsu, making a large red toe with his shield appear. Block, Mr. Gamaken! Raising its shield, the giant toad held its passengers close and took the brunt of the edge of the explosive shockwaves, sending them shooting back and skidding off, knocking out a very large patch of trees. Just barely, they'd made it. Frantically, Naruto asked Fu where she put Gaara's body, but he's shut up when Sasuke and Sakura appear, carrying Chiyo and the former one-tailed Jinchuriki's body. Not long after, all of the Leaf Ninja would regroup and be found by the Sand Shinobi. Chiyo, like in canon, would attempt to sacrifice herself in order to revive Gaara. However, with her very severe wound, and even with Sakura's help, her life force is very depleted. Much more than in canon. Of course, both Fu and Naruto offer to help and do so, but Chomei has nowhere near as much chakra as Kurama, and has already needed to recharge once today, whilst Kurama would technically have more to offer since there was no use of a three-tailed cloak here, though something he and Naruto referred to as their deal had been expended here. We definitely still got our speech from Chiyo. I never elaborated on it, but considering the close ties the Leaf and Sand have had for the last few years, she likely could have been a bit more wary in this timeline than she was in canon. But seeing the ferocity with which Leaf Shinobi defended their friends and comrades, countrymen or not, it's something that undeniably inspires admiration. Chiyo blesses this generation as the one to finally fix all their screw-ups for sure. Finding solace in some form of paying it forward, She sets off to follow her grandson. Gaara is revived, but sadly, he is only bought a little longer to live. The extraction process is actually resulting in fatality in this instance because of all the debuffs the revival process had over it. He is finally reunited with Naruto though, who is truly broken by this failure. Naruto just barely makes through introducing Fu for fighting his own anguish, but Gaara expresses genuine joy at their reunion, and is very pleased to meet Fu. The former Jinchuriki asks to be brought back to the Sand Village to spend his last moments home and with those precious to him. Of course, his wish is granted, and he's rushed back as fast as possible. There, barely able to stand and bandaged up, Raza speaks to his child on his deathbed, side by side with a crying Kankuro and a Tamari on the verge of breaking down herself. Later, when only the family was allowed to see Gaara any longer, Naruto Uzumaki was the only non-relative permitted in the room. The Nine-Tails Jinchuriki also holding back tears the entire time, as Gaara referred to him as part of his family. Raza feels further shame at outliving the boy. Under the circumstances, their reconciliation does finally happen, with the truth of Gaara's mother and uncle finally coming out. Rightfully so, as Kage, declassifying information isn't so hard, and leaving it unsaid would only cause his guilt to burn hotter. Raza tells Gaara to give his mother his love for all of them. The family for the first, and tragically last time, embraces, as Gaara peacefully passes on. Before their departure, Raza, bearing the pain of his village, acts as the Kazekage nonetheless, and formally thanks the Leaf Ninja, particularly shaking the hand of the still sullen Naruto, and telling him to personally thank Lord Fifth for his help. The trip back to the Leaf in this timeline is much more sullen, and those taking it are more thoughtful. Sasuke, for instance, though, is wanting to comfort Naruto, but he needs to finally set his sights on his main goal now. As a member of the Anbu Black Ops, he would go to the rendezvous with Orochimaru's spy and get all the answers he needed to bring Danzo Shimura to justice. But that, plus which fam, is where we'll be leaving this story off for right now. Hey guys, how goes it? I know this one was super long, but if you don't mind staying to the end, I'd really appreciate it. First off, I really hope you enjoyed it. I've worked really hard to try and build off every subsequent part more and more, and right now I have just about everyone in the story with a really good trajectory that I think won't come down to just how much stronger they are here than they are in canon. I spent a lot of time of the past parts dealing with that and setting that up, and I want to kind of peel that back a bit more and focus on character, since it's kind of overstated by this point. My goal is for you to be able to kind of go back and watch part 0 to the final part, whenever that comes out, and see a clear line of progression that works well for the characters on more levels than just fan servicey ones. Just at the end of the day. Like you'll notice here, Naruto comes up against the roadblock of Deidara, who acts as kind of a perfect foil against him as an opponent and character-wise. Like here, Naruto actually ends up getting by mostly because of the bonds he's made, something that was the first real lesson that we saw Jiraiya in this timeline really drilling into him. But even so, there's another thing that Jiraiya has kind of recently learned that Naruto still needs to kind of come to terms with. And to make matters worse, it was actually kind of hard for Jiraiya to learn this. So that's where he has to go from here. It's also why everyone but him does kind of well in this part. It's all super intentional. Sorry to drone on about that, I just really didn't want to see any, but why isn't Naruto the best comments, you know? In more important news, there are so many shoutouts for this part. First and foremost, AceTheWindRider. My dude, he is the editor of this monster upload, and I am certain he did an amazing job because he always does. You should definitely go and show him some love by using all his links in the description below. Definitely check out his channel, The Ranger Base, for some actually really dope Pokemon breakdowns. He's approaching Mons with a perspective that I actually haven't seen before, which is really hype actually. Also, I believe he and I will be cooking up a pretty cool project together soon, so be on the lookout for that too. Also shout out to Kobe aka KobzArts. My man knocked these Jiraiya timeline designs out of the park. I also owe Ozichiziri a huge shout out as he originally helped me make character sheets for the designs. Another artist shout out goes to Lohanny aka Titanium. She made this really crispy art style of the channel avatar and Kishimoto's art style with kind of a modern design to it, and I'm absolutely in love with it. Definitely look out for something story-based by her on the channel really soon, actually. Ox Nagadava, my ever-faithful writing companion, gave me some wonderful notes on the script, as did Burning Blood Sanji, aka Zenlucas Divers. Don't let me forget anybody. Hey guys, Plus Ultraman here, kind of adding in something very last minute. Quick side note, I did actually end up forgetting the voice actors, and huge shout outs to them. They should have had their names all listed in the beginning of the video or when their actual voice lines showed up. Going off order of appearance and introducing a new voice actor to the channel, we have Forenza Audio, aka Forenza ASMR, aka Forenza. I have wanted to have her voice act something on the channel for a long time, and I thought Fu would be a really good choice for her, and also she did really good at Tsunade, I think. Then we have the ever-talented Yuri Lowenthal, Gohan OXG as Sasuke. We had AceTheWindRider playing his role as Shikamaru once again and doing very well at that. And finally, we had Ox Nagadava reprising his role as Itachi. As always, I just kind of do the best with the voices I can provide just to give you guys something that's kind of stimulating to hear instead of just hearing me monologue everything. Do the best I can with that. And if any of you actually are looking for voice acting work and kind of just want to get your foot in the business, you can definitely start sending me kind of clips and outtakes of you just doing any character you think. I'm really going to expand the range of people that I'm trying to get to do voice acting with me. And of course, these will be paid commissions. You can find the business email down in the description below. Oh, a super cool deviant artist by the name of Marciana provided all the renders of Fu here. I know Maxi Chia does have a few of these, but there are also a few of them that I think are custom from her, and all the other ones that weren't commissioned were provided by Maxi Chia 22 himself, the absolute GOAT. As in terms of shilling for myself, please be sure to hit the like button. It really does do a lot to help the channel and the video itself, and that makes it easier to make more of these faster. Leave a comment, possibly share the video with a friend or on social media if you can, and speaking of, you can find my links to my Twitter and Instagram profiles below in the description. Both accounts see updates and previews of upcoming content, so they're actually really good follow, and you can also join the Discord to better interact with the community. Also, a really good way to stay up to date with content is by checking the community tab really often if you don't do that. And we definitely can't forget those whose wheels of fire fuel this channel the most in the patrons. In Hero tier, Lone Wolf McQuaid, Treb, and Stefan Consfront. In Shinobi tier, Little Ichigo, Zyre, and Gaming with Josh. In Z Warrior tier, Narku. In the Beyond tier, Pizza 15X, Knuckles OX, Don, and Crimson Manifesto. And our Plus Ultra tier patrons, DJ the Lazy Gamer, and Cooks. Thank you guys so much. And with that said, there is nothing left to say but to tell you guys to take care of yourselves and the world around you. Remember, Black Lives Matter, trans rights are human rights, and that I love you. As always, go beyond, plus ultra, and see you guys next time.